Hello and welcome to the Championship Weekly, a weekly show looking into everything that is happening in the Championship. This week we have something a little bit different. Both Rhys and I are incredibly busy. I have a festival that I am doing this week as a part of my job, a festival that I've organised. So this week we thought we would delve into the archives and show you an old interview that we did back in, I believe, either 2021 or 2022. And it is with former Ipswich player Lee Norfolk, who has had an absolutely brilliant career across English football, really. And he is also the first New Zealander to ever play for Ipswich. So this is an old interview back from when both Rhys and I did We Follow the Town, the first podcast we did together, and I hope you enjoy. We will hopefully be back next week, Monday I think, so I'll stop waffling on. Enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of We Follow the Town, a weekly show looking at all things Ipswich. This week, however, we are very lucky to be joined by a special guest in Lee Norfolk. But before we get on to tonight's show, just a quick mention of our new sponsor. Hang on. Yeah, I can cut that down and edit, so apologies for that. Julian Hughes is a golf coach at Old Joe's Golf and is a member of the World Golf Teachers Federation. Whether you're just starting out on your golfing journey or you already know how to play, Julian can help you improve your game. So what are you waiting for? Book lessons now through Old Joe's or directly through Julian Hughes at 07392 834 199. I'm going to say that again, 07392 834 199. But anyway, on to today's show. As I just said, we are very lucky to be joined by you, Lee. First of all, how are you? And you mentioned before you went live on air that you've been coaching today. What is that like for you?
Oh, it's great, very rewarding. Giving something back to the kids, especially at the moment, they're just desperate to get back on the pitch and after such a long layoff. So, you know, we're all buzzing, to be honest, coaches as well.
So has it been difficult being a coach during lockdown? Because, of course, there have been restrictions and it has been difficult to even get out there. So have you kind of found it challenging to, I guess, be a coach during like the world that we live in at the moment?
Well, we've sort of maintained some contact with the boys, you know, obviously over internet and Zoom calls and that sort of thing. And as coaches, we've all kept in touch pretty much. So the only thing that's really been missing is like I say, getting out on the grass. But we've took opportunities to speak to other clubs around Europe, actually. We've had some conference calls with some pretty, you know, Panathinaikos and clubs like that, and just to see how they do things. So we've kept our knowledge up. We've kept the communication between us all. So, as I say, just haven't been out on the pitch getting it done.
So, if anything, have you kind of like learnt more in the current circumstances that we're in at the moment? So it kind of like allowed you to learn more about the trade that you work in and more about coaching?
I think you never stop learning anyway, you know, either way. I've learned different things, put it that way, of how other clubs do it around, you know, do things around Europe. And I have to be pleased to say that we don't do things much different at Ipswich. You know, it's quite reassuring. The way we do things is pretty good compared to some of the top. I'm talking about some top clubs as well in Europe. At academy level, things aren't too different.
So, of course, we'll talk more about your career in coaching later on. And I invite everybody in chat to get involved, send in those questions, and we'll read them out on the air. But let's start at the very beginning of your career. Because I have written down here that you scored a goal during the New Zealand under-2017s against Fiji in 1991. But I guess a rather cliched question would be, how did you actually get into football? Did you kind of like play from a very young age, or did you just kind of like get into it, if that makes sense?
Yeah. My dad was a pro at Scunthorpe, and obviously so it was kind of a natural progression for me. When I was born, I think I was kicking a ball about 3 with him. and soon fell in love with the game, even though I was living in New Zealand. And he just got me into the best sides over there. So which led up to, like you say, playing for the under-17s national level and scoring that goal, which was a fantastic feeling. But yeah, so I was 15 then, and that's when I came over to. A year later, I came over to England.
So, what was it like growing up in New Zealand playing football there? Because the culture in that country is very different to the culture down here. So it must have been very different growing up in New Zealand and playing football over there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you say, rightly say, it's a very much a rugby nation, and football's a bit of a poor relation, really. But there is, there is a lot of people who play football still. It just hasn't got the recognition that you have here or in Europe. So yeah, it didn't stop me. I was football mad, and I played wherever I could at school, for different club sides. Played for a regional side, which would be the equivalent of Suffolk, for example. Like county sides. And then led up to the national development side, which was from the age of 10 up to 16. So yeah, you're competing very much with rugby. Everyone wants to be an All Black, and if you're going to be anything in football, you either have to play in Australia or come to Europe.
So how difficult was it moving to England at such a young age? Because of course you joined the Ipswich Town Academy, and here's a fun stat: you became the first player from New Zealand to ever play in the Premier League. So how difficult was it adjusting to life down here? And do you reckon that it made you a better player?
Oh, definitely. Adapting wise, I mean, I'd lived in Blackpool when I was 12 for a few months, so I kind of knew a little bit about the English way of life. Even though my parents and all my family are English, I was still brought up in a slightly different culture. So coming over here, I had to adapt to a certain way of life. The weather was obviously very, very different as well, much colder. So that was I came over. It was 3 feet of snow when I got off the train at Ipswich, thinking, what is all this? And I've got 6 weeks on trial in this. So and obviously it was a football environment, very much a football environment from top to bottom when I went down to Ipswich. So it was very different to what I was used to. But again, it opened my eyes. I had a bad first couple of days actually, and I think that perhaps it was down to travel or just adapting to the pace of the game. But within 3 or 4 days, I was playing at the level required, and obviously good enough to get an apprenticeship.
So were there any coaches, that helped you adjust to life in England? Because especially playing for a youth side, they must have made a priority just to kind of help you settle in there.
Yeah, Tony Dable was the youth development officer and chief scout, and he was very accommodating and just, he was to help me settle for those 6 weeks. And then Peter Vivian was the youth team coach, and he was very good with young players. And I just never felt I didn't ever feel cast aside or forgotten or left alone or anything like that. So all I had to do was kind of play my football. I actually went to Leeds after 6 weeks. I was supposed to go to Leeds as well, but I'd already agreed to sign for Ipswich at that age. I went to Leeds, and it was very, very different. You felt like you were one of hundreds of kids. They just didn't have the time to spend that Ipswich had, where they could sort of be a bit more have a bit more one-on-one time with you. So Peter Vivian and Tony Dable were very instrumental in me settling in that time.
So why did you choose Ipswich over Leeds? Was the decision to join Ipswich maybe before you had the offer from Leeds, or did you have both offers on the table before you moved down to England?
No, I mean, actually, I after 2 weeks, I'd more or less agreed that I was going to have a YTS. I wanted to come to England and get a YTS. That's what I needed to do. It was my first objective, really. So once I've been offered that, I thought, great, I've got that in the bag. I like Ipswich. I've got some nice digs. what I had to do was go back to New Zealand first anyway to finish my school, so I wasn't going to be starting. But my family actually from Yorkshire, so I went up there anyway, and I went to Leeds, and I went to see, I can't remember, Howard Kendall was the manager, and I spoke with him briefly. And I didn't really get a nice feeling from Leeds as a club at the time. Ipswich, as I say, was more friendly. There was more chance I was going to get a chance of progressing through the ranks because of Ipswich's history with youth players. So it just made more sense.
So talking about getting a chance, you made your debut against Southampton on the 25th in 1994, and he helped Town make a comeback from 1-0 down, and Town eventually won 2-1. So what was your feeling when you first heard your name on the team sheet? What was it like making your debut?
I can't describe it. It is a dream, but at the same time, you're so focused that it's very difficult to take it in at the time. So obviously, I'd been in the squad a little while. I've been travelling with the team. I've been training with the team. Just after George Burley arrived, so he was kind of getting me in the first team environment. And then the Southampton game, we were 1-0 down at half time, like you say, and it was just bringing Ian Marshall off. Lee, on you go. Try and make an impact. Try and make a difference. And I basically ran around as much as I could. Try to get on the ball. I think it was definitely a game of two halves. We grabbed the ball by the horns a little bit, if you like, and Bruce Grobbelaar more or less miskicked his first one of the back passes to Ian Alex May for the first, and then Lee Chapman scored the winner, and I think Grobbelaar came out and missed this punch for that one. So to score that in front of two goals in front of the North Stand was fantastic. And after that, I just wanted more.
So I was doing some research before we came on air, and I have some old programmes back there, some from 94, some from 95, around the time you were playing. And I read this interesting thing from a programme. It said you was wanted by the under-2019s, we're talking about the New Zealand international team, to play for the Youth World Cup qualifying games in Fiji, but you decided to remain at Ipswich instead in a bid to tie down a regular first team spot. So why did you decide to do that? Was it a difficult decision to make? Because, of course, the games probably meant a lot to you, probably means a lot to New Zealand as a nation. So, why did you basically prioritise club football over international football?
It's a good question. It was really that. I just got into the squad. I got into the team a little bit, and I think by going back to New Zealand, it might have jeopardised that. I mean, going back to New Zealand, you've got to be gone for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, really, because of the distance you're travelling. So that meant taking maybe best part of a month out of my season at a crucial time for me. So it was a tough decision, but I had to think about my bread and butter, and I wanted to get on at Ipswich. I spoke to the manager, and the manager kind of left it with me. In fairness, he left it with me, but I just thought the timing probably wouldn't be right if I was to go back at that time. As much as I'd be proud to represent my country again, I just needed to make sure I cemented that place, really. And I was right on the edges, right on the fringes of getting being a more regular. But in hindsight, who knows? Maybe I could have gone and enjoyed a month in the sun, but there we are.
And of course, to those in chat, if you want to get involved and ask your questions, please do go ahead and ask them. But from 1997 to 98, you went back to your home country to play for North Shore United at the age of 22. So did your career down here in England pan out the way you really wanted to? Because I know you came back later on in your career, but before that, did it really pan out?
No, I think I got stopped in my tracks a little bit, really, after that season. Ipswich got relegated from the Premier League, and I think they wanted to spring back up as soon as they could. So it was more a case that it wasn't about playing young players so much. It was now we had to get back up and place first team places for me. I mean, I was competing with 7 or 8 centre midfielders. You had Simon Milton, you had Geraint Williams, Klaus Thompson, Steve Sedgley, Adam Tanner, Steve Palmer. There was probably 7 or 8, experienced players that I was competing with for a place. So my exposure would have been was very much reduced, and opportunities weren't so much. So I went to Cambridge United. I spoke to Cambridge United. I was going to sign for them because they just sold Micah Hyde. The money wasn't very good, and then Wrexham said, "Why don't you come up here? We're looking for a player, a centre midfielder." And I went up to Wrexham for 6 weeks, more or less, on the promise of a contract. They didn't move on 3 players. They were expected 3 players were supposed to move on, and they didn't move on. So they signed their contracts. Once you've been offered a contract, you can't then take it away from a player, and they had the option. And because they hadn't moved, they just thought, well, we'll just sign our contracts and we'll stay here. So again, no room in the squad for me. And so I went back to New Zealand. I had the opportunity to go back there, play for 6 months in the Summer League. And the guy who brought me back was a guy called Winton Rufer, and he was a Kiwi who had quite a distinguished career in Germany. And he said, if you come back here, I'll try and get you to a club in Germany, because he was running a team, North Shore United at the time. So I went back there, played there for 6 months, was coaching full time, and it just didn't materialise really, and I got a little bit impatient. I had a girlfriend in Ipswich, and Rushden and Diamonds had been on the phone saying, "Why don't you come over and try with us?" So that was it. I really came back over, and that was how I returned.
So were you very much prioritising a return to England, or were you open?
Yeah.
I don't know, going elsewhere in Europe, maybe Germany, maybe France.
Yeah, that was more or less it. I went back to refresh, see my family, clear my head a little bit, and maybe try a different avenue, which might have been Germany. I was also looking at America. There was coaching roles in America, coaching and playing roles over there. But ideally, I wanted to come back to Europe. So, and England being the first place really. So I had to make a decision after sort of 6 months. The Summer League was coming to an end. What do I do? I've got an offer to go to Rushden and Diamonds. I'll take it. And I did. I went to Rushden for about 3 weeks. Brian Talbot was the manager. And he was, we were kind of talking. We were in dialogue about signing at the end of the season. And then I got a call from Peter Morris, who was Kings Lynn manager. And he said, "Why don't you come and play for me? If you're not going to sign at Rushden, why don't you come and play for me at Kings Lynn till the end of the season?" And then he'd already got the job. He knew he'd got a job at Kettering. So he said, "At the end of the season, I'll take you to Kettering." So that was kind of my decision. I'll go play non-league at Kings Lynn for a little while, keep my fitness up, and wait and see what happens at the end of the season with Rushden.
So what was it like playing in non-league with Kings Lynn? Because, of course, you also played for Cambridge City, and as we just mentioned, Kings Lynn, Woodbridge Town. Was it kind of a culture shock to play in the English non-league?
Yeah, very different. The hardest thing was maintaining your fitness because you're not training every day. So, no disrespect, the level wasn't as high as what I was used to. So, although Kings Lynn, what a good club that is, I can't speak highly enough as a club. It was 1,500 every week. That made it feel like a professional club, really. So yeah, it was different, and then you lose that bit of sharpness, that bit of fitness that you're used to. And I obviously had to find work as well. And it was kind of a case where you spring back into the game full time, or you accept that maybe it's not going to happen, and you get a reality check and you think, okay, well, maybe I need to just think about another career and play non-league, which you see happening more and more now. Players are dropping into the non-league and having an alternative career, because it's nice to play in the lower leagues, but it's tough. Every couple of years, you're worried about a contract. You might have to uproot and go somewhere else. So I think you have to make a decision really at 22, 23. If you're not in the first team somewhere regularly, you've got to sort of think, okay, there might be something else I have to think of.
So what drove you to keep on the path of playing football? Because playing in non-league, it must have been tough, especially if you had a job to balance as well. So yeah, what drove you to carry on?
Well, the love of the game, first of all. You just want to play football. You're fit. You're young. There's nothing better than playing football, really, and trying to win things. So yeah, that was, and who knows? It was a case of possibly you might get picked up again by a pro club, but yeah, so it was mainly the love of the game, of course.
So soon after that, you found your home, if we can say that, because you moved to AFC Sudbury, made 268 appearances there, scoring 55. And you also made it to 3 FA Vars finals with Sudbury. And in the FA Vars final in 2003, you lost Upton Park to Brigtown, but Sudbury brought over 6,000 supporters. First of all, a rather cliched question again. What was the atmosphere like at Upton Park? And yeah, what was it like playing in a cup final?
Oh, fantastic! Other than the result, thanks for reminding me. They were. The gutting thing is that for all 3 of those finals, none of them were at Wembley because it was being redeveloped. So I could have played at Wembley for 3 years in a row. But yeah, I mean, Sudbury made plenty of noise down at Upton Park. We sort of, the trouble with that game is we got hit with a goal quite early and knocked the stuffing out of us a little bit, really, and we got back into the game, and then the goalkeeping error for the second one, and then we should have had a penalty in the last few minutes. It was quite a blatant decision not given, but that's the way it goes. I mean, who knows? We had VAR back then. we might have been 2-2 with a few minutes to go, but yeah, that was a good experience. Obviously, playing in a cup final at that level, any level really, but at that level was fantastic.
So let's jump back a little, because we just mentioned you joined AFC Sudbury. How did that move kind of materialise? Was it very much a move that you wanted to make?
Well, I'll tell you what it was. Is when I talk about getting a job, I became a courier driver, and where I worked, there was a lad called Aaron Gardner. I don't know if you remember him. Aaron was a bit of a Sudbury legend, really. He'd been at Ipswich as an apprentice as well. And at the time, I was playing for, I think, Bishop Stortford. So it was travelling. There was a lot of travelling in that league, that Ryman Premier, going down to London all the time and down to the South Coast. So Aaron said to me, look, he was at Sudbury Wanderers at the time, and he said, why don't you come play for Sudbury Wanderers? So I spoke to Keith Martin, the manager. We agreed on what terms. So yeah, I played over there. So it was a bit more local. And then at the end of that season, I think I'd only played half of that season. I'd signed halfway through. That's when Sudbury Town and Sudbury Wanderers merged into AFC. So I was there sort of from day one.
So, of course, with AFC Sudbury, you won the Jewson League Championship in 2000 and 2001. And first of all, what was it like winning the league? Was it very much a grind to win the league? Was it very much different than the experience that you would have had at the professional level?
Oh, I think, to win a league at any level is an achievement. Every game's a cup final when you're up the top. Everyone wants to beat you, so you are playing 40-odd cup finals. But that side that we had, I mean, we won. I think I won 5 titles with that club over 6 or 7 seasons. That side that we had could have played, Conference South level. They were all good players. It was a tough league back then as well. That Regions or Jewson League as it was. It's been a bit more spread out these days with the amount of leagues that there are. So. It was real tough league, that Jewson League. But yeah, to win the league, I like I've heard 1 or 2 ex-pros saying, to win it the following year is the mark of a good side. If you can win a league and then keep winning it, that's the mark of a good side. And we had a habit of winning, which comes from within, really.
How good was Keith Martin as a manager there? Because he's more or less an AFC Sudbury legend, if I can say this, because he won plenty of cups there. He won a few league titles. So yeah, how good was he as a manager, and what did he teach you as a player?
He didn't teach me anything as a player, Keith. He was a fantastic guy, Keith. Very passionate guy. loved his football, and he knew a good player, of course, and put some good sides together. More or less, the team would go out and do it themselves, really. Yeah, and if you didn't play well, you certainly heard about it, either at half time or full time. But and I've seen Keith have punch ups for players, and so he's very, very passionate, very hot, red blooded man, should we say. Loved his football, and I enjoyed playing for him. He was good fun.
So after that, you basically became a coach. You became a player coach for Leiston FC in steps 5 and 4. So how did you get into coaching? Was it very much something that you wanted to do and something that you had ambitions to do once you finished your career as a player? Or was it something that just kind of like came about?
Well, actually, my dad was a coach. As I say, after he played, he did his A licence in England before he went over to New Zealand, and so I kind of got a little bit from him. He used to take training sessions over there, and I used to sort of watch him do it. So, and then when I left Ipswich and came back that time, I got involved with the academy first time round. I was working with Tony Kinsella for a couple of seasons. The first year that we worked with the Darren Bent's year under 15s, Darren Ambrose. So it was great to work with young talent and help them on their way a little bit. And then obviously I went into playing a bit more with semi-pro. So that kind of died a little bit, even though I was still doing a little bit of coaching here and there. But when I sort of came towards the end of my playing career, I was getting more involved in the coaching side of it, as being assistant manager here and there, and then obviously I initially worked with Norwich for a season with their academy, but then Steve Foley got me back into the Ipswich Academy, which is where I prefer to be honest.
So when you were at Leiston, you also became a caretaker manager there. What was it like being a caretaker manager? Did you kind of like learn what it was like coaching more on a hands-on level, if that makes sense?
I was more used to obviously being a coach. The manager has all the tough decisions to make, so you can go off and train the lads and have a laugh with the boys while the manager makes the tough decisions. So when I was doing that, I realised it's very, very different. The relationship with the players is very different, and you kind of have to step away from that, which it can be tough, because all of a sudden you're looking players in the eye and saying you're not playing this week, or you're not doing it, and you have to harden up a little bit. So I do admire managers in the way they have to conduct themselves. I'm much more enjoy the coaching side of it, but I'm not averse to being a manager. It's I think it was about 7 or 8 weeks I did it at Leiston, only because we were in a good position and I didn't want it to go to waste. I could have left, with the previous manager, but I wanted to stay, and I wanted to make sure we finished as high as we could that season. So that was good. Again, working with Steve Foley, Steve was my assistant, if you like. There's not many people that can say that. So it was a good experience.
So you also became assistant manager at AFC Sudbury, but a real question is, do you have ambitions to one day actually become a full-time manager? Because at the moment, you're a first-team coach at Leiston FC. You also coach at Ipswich. So would you one day like to maybe make the transition into full-time management?
Full-time management? What, back into professional game?
Yeah, or even at non-league football, maybe.
Yeah, I wouldn't go into the full-time management. I mean, that's obviously, that's several levels above, of course. I just think it's very precarious, the professional scene. So I would do it. I enjoyed assistant manager at Sudbury as well. I at Leiston at the moment, I have to step into that role every time Darren's not there. So I get the luxury of being first team coach and then assistant manager some weeks. So I'm able to sort of have a bit of both worlds. But going into I wouldn't ever turn it down if it was a chance to manage at a club and I felt everything was right in my circumstances and the club circumstances. Yeah, I'd entertain it.
So let's talk more about your role at Ipswich, because as we have mentioned previously, you are a youth coach at Ipswich. How did you get that role, though, and what is it like coaching for a professional club like Ipswich?
How I got the role was, as I say, I knew Steve, and he basically sort of said, right, we've got to get you into Ipswich, and I did my badges, did my courses that I needed to get done, and they knew me anyway. I'd done some coaching there before, so I got brought in, and I'm thankful for that. And I've been, I don't know, I think the second time round I've been probably there about 10 years. So it's great to work at an elite level where you're coaching kids, because you have to realise that, that some of these kids are going to go all the way, and you've got an influence on them. You have to make sure that for that time that you've got them, they're learning the right things, because you can damage them if you do things wrong. You can damage their development. So it's fantastic working at an elite level academy.
So here's a rather weird question. What would you say is the difference between coaching senior players and coaching youngsters? Because the approach has to be incredibly difficult. You have to kind of almost be considerate of what you say as a youth coach compared to maybe as a coach for more senior pros.
Yeah, that's another good question. Yeah, I mean, certainly your man management is different with senior players. You're talking at a senior level, it's more results based. So you have to get the results out of the players, and if they're not producing the goods, then it can be a simple case of you either put your arm around them to try and get the best out of him, or what makes them tick. If you drop them, you're going to make them angry. You're going to get a reaction. So you can be very honest with players at a senior level. With kids, you sometimes you just have to. You've got to get to know them as well. It's not so much results based, it's more about their development. So you have to make sure that your communication is helping them to learn more than anything. You don't want them switching off because they're losing confidence or something like that, or you've got at them a little bit. So yeah, you have to treat them slightly differently, that's for sure.
So did the fact that you moved down to England at such a young age, has that kind of helped you relate to the youngsters who have maybe moved to Ipswich at a young age? Has that kind of helped you relate to them a bit more?
Well, I think because I've been through it myself, that helps, of course. You've been in their shoes. They don't realise it. Some of them don't realise that you've played. When you're talking about 10, 11, 12-year-olds, you're just a coach to them. They don't know what you've done, and you have to sort of say to them, look, I've been where you are, and especially like lads that come in on trial, for example, they have to sort of adapt to the environment. You have to make them feel comfortable and allow them to show you what they can do. But yeah, I think that's the most important thing is that I can relate to them, is because I've been there.
So finally, before we get into some of the questions sent in, what are your future ambitions? Do you maybe have ambitions to carry on in coaching, or do you have ambitions to maybe get into management one day?
I mean, coaching, I just want to carry on with coaching as long as I can. I want to stay in the game as long as I can, really. As long as I'm fit and able enough, I'll be involved at some point, at some level, hopefully. I had some time out last season, or the season before, I should say, and then come back with Leiston. And unfortunately, because of what's happened, it was a bit stop-start. So we're all just desperate to get a whole season under our belts. So yeah, coaching, I don't see that changing. I don't see me sort of looking at a manager's role for the foreseeable future. I'll just carry on with Leiston as long as I can, as long as they want me.
So how has it kind of been being at Leiston during the pandemic, if that makes sense? Because has it been hard kind of rearranging pre-season fixtures? Because I know a lot of clubs down here where I live are actually struggling with that side due to the fact that, nobody really knows what's going on.
Where are you?
I'm in Cornwall. I used to live in Suffolk, I'm just going to say that. So I'm a few hours away. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what we've done was we've put together a bit of a program leading into the off season, if you like. So we actually started training. We start training next week. We're going to train once a week. We've got a couple of friendlies. Just because the boys have had all this time off, they don't really need a break now. They're actually itching to get back into it. So we've got a bit of a light program going into the summer, so that they're going to be playing a couple of games and training and ticking over. Then they'll have the short break in probably through June, and then we've already sort of got the pre-season program, a lot of it set up already. So yes, arranging games has been tough because a lot of clubs are having their pitches redeveloped. So we were finding that we just didn't have a place to play. They want to play us, but there's nowhere to play the game. So that's been the toughest bit. But we've got a couple of friendlies coming up.
So let's get into the question sent in by the listeners. We have one here by Julian Hughes. Evening, Lee. What would you say was your happiest memory at Ipswich and the best player you've ever played with?
Evening. My best moment would have to be probably my full debut. I mean, the game against Southampton, which we won, was wonderful as well. But making my full debut against Newcastle was probably my most unbelievable moment for me. The best player I've played with, I've played with some good players. John Walk would have to be right up there, and he was in his older years, but he still had it. I still learned a lot from him. I played with some really good players in midfield: Simon Milton, Steve Sedgley, Stuart Slate, a very, very talented player when he came with us. What a player he was. So those players are the ones I would probably that jump to mind, really.
So what was John Walk like to play alongside? Because he must have been a real influence to play with, especially for a younger player. He must have been an incredible player to look up to. Yeah,
because he read the game. He saw it so early. So he was playing more in a defensive role, and I was in midfield. So the ball went over my head, and I'd turn, and maybe their striker would be flicking on to the number 2 striker, and he had already dropped off because he could see what's going to happen. And was sweeping up, so it was almost like he had a bit of a cigar on, even at 39-40. So that's when I started to think about how much in advance you have to think in a game of football and how you have to anticipate things. But he was just doing it naturally at that stage. He'd been playing a high level of football for 20-25 years.
Were there any players that took you under your wing or that kind of mentored you on the pitch?
Well, actually, Stuart Slate was very, very encouraging for me. He really built my confidence up, actually. So yeah, I would have to say Stuart Slater probably more than anybody else. I would think. It's not like I wasn't being spoken to by any of the players. David Linnigan was very, very good with me as the club captain. He was very good. Neil Thompson, although they were these were all players that I looked up to and I had a good relationship with. So, yeah.
So Jack Tullett asks, and I understand if you can't answer this question, what are your thoughts on the current state of Ipswich Town?
Well, I have to be careful how I answer it because I'm still employed there. But I think clearly it was, it wasn't working under the previous management, but the change has been made. I think there's room for optimism now. I can say there's a really good atmosphere down there. Everyone's smiling and buzzing again. And yeah, I just, I hear he comes across a very honest person, does the manager, and I hear his assessments after games, and he talks about belief, how we just think there's a lack of belief. So, all it takes is 3 or 4 results and the belief is back there, and then all of a sudden they go on this run, and who knows, with 10 games left, there's a real chance. And I look at the results, it's there's not a lot in it. They're not leaking goals. They perhaps needed to score maybe 1 or 2 more. But I'm sure they'll get it right. It's just, football's very precarious. On a couple of results, you can go on an unbeaten run and then be right up there, and the belief right back where it should be.
And I guess we can transition into this question, maybe something that you can answer. How many players, Lee, do you think Cook will have to bring in to implement his style of play going forward?
Well, I think if he's, I think he could, with the squad he's got, he might not bring any and just do it with what he's got. I think there's 15 players out of contract, isn't there? So the pressure's on the players. He's more or less saying to the players, right, show me what you can do and you'll get a chance. And then decide at the end of the season, I guess. But the squad's good enough. The squad's good enough to, they've been top of the league. They've started the last 2 seasons like house on fire, haven't they? And then it's just dropped off a little bit. So they've showed that they can be up there. And I think, it'd be nice to have the 20,000 back, wouldn't it? Week in, week out, because I think that makes a big difference. I'm sure he's probably got his ideas on 1 or 2 players he wants to bring in, but maybe he hasn't. I don't know.
So maybe this is a question that I should have asked earlier on in the show. Sorry, but how closely do you work with the senior management at Ipswich Town? Do you kind of like tell them the players that you have coming through, who you maybe recommend in the future? I know you work with very young players, but do you work closely with the more senior coaches?
Well, there's always dialogue between the academy managers and the first team. Obviously, you've got the under-23s that are part of the academy, so they're that link in between the first team and the academy. I'm sure they'll dip into that whenever they need. These players are learning their trade up to between 18 and 23, ready to get their chance. So there's always that. And the manager comes and Paul Cookie comes and watches training. He comes and watches academy games. So, he's certainly alive to what's going on as well.
Anyway, that is a perfect way to end the show. I just want to thank everybody who. Well, we actually have one final question. I was just about to wrap up, but I'm going to ask you one more, and then we will wrap up because it is getting late.
Sure.
So. Julian Hughes again says, Lee, do you have any funny stories I can wind Stuart Slate up as he has golf lessons with me in 2 weeks' time? And then he goes on to say he's a great bloke. So, any funny stories for Julian?
Funny stories about Stuart? I just remember, he was a really good lad. I got on really well. It was almost like, this player who'd come from West Ham and Celtic. It was almost like he was just, a young lad. Really, he was very funny and had no ego whatsoever. So I got on really well with him. The only thing I can remember is that he had to sell his missus golf for £1, or had to buy his missus golf for £1. So you can call him a bit of a cheapskate, really. I think his missus got a lovely golf, but it only cost £1. You'd have to ask him why that was. I don't really know where that's come from, to be honest, where he got it from, but it only cost him £1.
So there you go. That's something you can wind him up when you see him in 2 weeks. But anyway, now we'll wrap up because it is getting late. I just want to thank all of those who have taken part in the chat. And I just want to thank you as well, Lee, because we really appreciate you having you on, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to talk to us. So thank you very much.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And of course, we'll be back next week. We'll be back next Wednesday and next Sunday for more We Follow the Town, as well as a Wigan review. And of course, you can find us on Twitter at We Follow the Town. And of course, you can find the show on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. So thank you very much for joining in, and I'll see you all next week.